go. Let's hit the road. We'll talk about it all as we go. Feeling brave, free and alive. It's time for a sex drive.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first ever episode of Sex Drive. Oh my God, I love it so much. Yes, but welcome to the first ever episode of Sex Drive, a podcast that encourages open, engaging, and sometimes tough conversations about sexuality, communication, and relationships. My name is Melanie.
I'm Katie.
I'm Dorothy.
I'm Sam.
I'm Lauren.
I'm Michelle.
I'm Kelsey.
Okay, so how did we all get here? So we're a group of sex educators, and we met through it's a mouthful. We met through the Institute for Sexuality Education and Enlightenment. So we were all in a supervisor group together, and we really enjoyed meeting every week. So we just kept going for another year, and we're still here. So we all use she, her pronouns, and I guess that's about it. Anybody else want to say anything about how we met?
I was just going to say that this group and how we've come to be is probably the most romantic love story of my life so far. I'm ready for books to be written about it. We need pop culture references. We should be the moment of relationships. We should be relationship goals. # relationship goals.
Next, a sisterhood of the traveling pants.
I love it. But would it be like the Sisterhood of the Traveling Dildo, something like that?
Maybe not.
The puppet.
Just as long as we can travel in our car. Just as long as this sisterhood is traveling in that car, I'm fine. We can go anywhere.
So a little bit about Michelle just talked about sort of how this group came together, but part of what made it so magical for us was because, we're all sort of doing our own thing within sex ed, and we got together after our sort of formalized group ended, and we decided we wanted to continue our love story. So we've just been meeting every week on and off since then, and we have some really wonderful, juicy, thoughtful, insightful, any other adjectives, conversations. And someone eventually said, we should be recording these. We should be, talking about this. And I think part of what made our group so wonderful was because we were all allowed to be sort of open and vulnerable with each other in expressing what we didn't know. And I guess I just want to acknowledge that this podcast really is born from the idea that we don't have to, that it takes courage to learn in a very public way, because in order to learn, you really have to be vulnerable with what you don't know. And when it comes to sex and sexuality and bodies and relationships and all these sorts of things, it's a topic that I think a lot of people can just assume that they should know all these things about sex and sexuality. And there's a lot of vulnerability when to just say I don't know, I was never taught, and that's kind of why sex educators are wonderful to exist right now. Anyway.
I think
I'm rambling, y'all.
No,
I'm rambling.
Katie, I was going to say that some of my favorite things were when we would even just have a WhatsApp chat about shaving practices that each of us would do, right? It became this safe space to ask things that we thought as sex educators might be embarrassing to ask other people, right? And it became this safety net of no question was a stupid question. And we were asking about fantasies. We were asking about, these were personal topics, shaving practices. We shared lots of trimmers and razors and lots of things one day. It became a safe place for me, this group did, where I could be learning and expanding, like you said, which took an amount of vulnerability that I didn't know if I necessarily could show to the rest of the world.
Yeah. And also we have because we each have such different sort of perspectives and we work with various populations, like we all have our own personal blind spots. That's part of why this was really helpful for us, and I think helpful to other people as well. So for instance, I work with people primarily who have experienced infertility, all the various sexual impacts of trying to conceive unsuccessfully for sometimes years, and how that can really just mess with our sense of our bodies, our relationships, and pleasure. And so that's sort of like my world. But what are y'all's worlds within sex ed? Let's talk about that.
I know. I feel like, oh my gosh, there's so much that both you and Lauren just said that is so resonates with me, and like something that I feel like we all value. And I know that I carry in my life every day is like learning is like a lifelong process about ourselves, about our bodies, really about like any topic in life. I feel like there's always learning to be done. And I'm just super excited about this podcast for, I mean, of course, so many reasons, but one of them being is that like, I feel like this podcast is a way that we can perhaps bring in our different expertise and our different perspectives, and definitely like our training as sexuality educators. But like, I also feel like this is a space in a podcast where I can like be a human first who is looking to learn and grow alongside all of you and whoever is like listening and watching. And I think that that's really a beautiful thing and a beautiful space that can sometimes be really hard to find. I would say like for me, I am just so in love with the idea of love right now, y'all. I mean, it's kind of like a heads up that like maybe my episode will be kind of about that down the road, but more about that later. But yeah, like I'm loving the idea of understanding love and relationships and building and how to build like intentional relationships with people in your life that are like thoughtful and mindful and just like all about giving and receiving and expressing love. That is something that I feel like I'm really exploring in my own life right now. And as a sexuality educator, I'm exploring it in that sense as well. And I mean, another big bucket for me is pleasure. I love seeking new ways in my life to have pleasure, to feel pleasurable. And I think that in this effed up world with all the shit and all of the oppression, pleasure is it feels so sacred and like such a sanctuary. And it feels sometimes so hard to feel because of the effed upness of the world. And so I think that that's at the center of me as a human and as me as a sexuality educator of just like pleasure. I want all of us to experience, to feel it, to love it, to embrace it, to find it, to reclaim it. Whatever you need to do, I want pleasure in your lives. So yeah, that's really what I kind of come from and what I'm really passionate about, at least right now. Dorothy, I want to hear from you. What are you into?
Oh, I'm into it. I'm into it all. But what I do is, I mean, I've been in love and relationships and sex involved in some way, shape, or form professionally since I was in my 20s, and now I'm in my 40s. And I have an online school called the Nantucket Love School. So we focus on spirit and pleasure, which we believe leads to deeper love. So that connection, not only with pleasure, but some form of higher self or higher calling or higher being, where you can connect and bring in that into, actually believe in calling in God, that leads to better orgasms, more pleasure, more connection, intuitively knowing what to do with, like where to go next to follow the pleasure for yourself and for your partner. So I'm 100% on that sacredness. I love the path that we follow in the Nantucket Love School is the sacred sexual woman. So really coming into that sacredness of connection and pleasure for sure. And one word that I've been playing with a lot is delight, because I feel like it adds so much of pleasure, but then also joy. Sometimes pleasure can be one of those activating words, just like if I say God, right? It's those two things that people are like, oh, start to cringe up. When you start to say maybe delight, there's maybe more ease with an accessibility when it comes to that joy and pleasure can be hand in hand. It doesn't necessarily have to be sexual.
Absolutely.
Sam, how about you?
First of all, I want to say thank you because I love you all so much. One thing that I wanted to say earlier, and I want to say it now, you all were the people that helped me keep up with all the things that I wanted to do in this specific environment, in the sexuality education that I wanted to go through, because so much of the backlash that I got from starting this journey was pretty hard on me. And sometimes I wanted to just get out of it so I stopped hearing everything that people were telling me. But every time I would meet with you, I was just be like, this is why I want to do this. This is where I want to stay forever. This is the community that supports me. That's what I want. So thank you. So I am a sex educator, really trying to help my East African community by giving them tools that would help them turn all those generational trauma and taboo topics into healthy conversations while celebrating their bodies, pretty much. So how I grew up in a community where our culture would just teach us really not to talk about our bodies or not even to trust our bodies. So what I've been doing is kind of sharing these messages that will help my community love themselves and also listen to themselves. So that's really pretty much what I've been doing. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. So I'm going to hand the torch to Michelle. Nope. Oops. Lauren.
Doesn't matter. You can hand it to Michelle first. It doesn't matter. But I am glad I'm going because I'm so honored to hear that, Sam. I think it was a joy to go through our supervision process. And again, as Katie said in the beginning, watch everybody bring kind of these vulnerable questions of, I just read this and it differs from that. And we started having those types of conversations so early on too, bringing in our vantage points or things that we had read and might disagree with to this open space. And it was always met with understanding and kind of applause for like, yeah, you're researching that thing. That's really neat. Tell us more. And there aren't many places in my community, and we'll talk about why I do what I do, where I've ever met with that type of good for you, keep pushing in. I have this vantage point. And I think that's so healthy. And I think it's how our world will heal. Yeah. So like Sam, I am Lauren, and I work with folks also coming out of repressive sexuality upbringings, specifically with the term purity culture. Some might be familiar with that term and some might not at all. I was raised in what would definitely be known as a purity culture, but I didn't know it. I was happily indoctrinated and happily secure. So I went through a lot of personal changes in life and went through what I call like my sexual reawakening. And when I did that, I started eating up books on sexuality and then thought, oh, I really want to help others do the same type of thing, but I should go to school for that because I don't have any education. And that's where I met all these folks. So now I work specifically with purity culture survivors, but then also helping individuals, kind of like Dorothy was saying, come back to their bodies and find that pleasure doesn't need to mean sexual encounters, that a pleasurable existence is getting to, right? Having the honor of existing in this world as broken as it is, right? This is a pleasurable encounter of my day, seeing these faces and hearing these words. It is my greatest joy when clients leave sessions with me and are at peace with the frequency of their sexual engagements. It hasn't changed at all, but if finally they're at a peace with, oh, I am perfectly normal. And the type of intimacy I share with my partner is now enhanced, as is my walks in the woods and my love affairs with my friends, as Melanie is saying. So yes, I work with purity culture survivors, but not to necessarily make them pole dancing, strip club running people. I think we often think that that's the other side. It's like, oh, well, don't be repressed. So you need to go be an expert pole dancer. But no, that's my favorite thing to do. Now, Michelle, your turn. Tell us, who
It
are
is
you?
me. So one thing that happens to me often when I'm listening to people is I'll forget my train of thought, especially when everything is so good. But I just want to start off by echoing what everyone else has said about this being a safe place to learn and be vulnerable and express what we don't know. And I really want to highlight that things change all the time. So even, we might know what we know right now. In a year, they could discover something different. So I think that's one of the reasons why this space is so special, because we're all in at different points. We all have different interests. So the same way, kind of like a nurse or a doctor or a therapist, they'll do continuing education to stay up to date. We kind of have to do the same thing. Or if, somebody recommends you to a specialist, we already have people who are, kind of focused in purity culture or infertility or teens. So we have a lot of different perspectives here, which is awesome. But for me, I think my focus is finding that balance. So finding the balance that you need to take those steps, because sometimes it's hard to just start. It's hard to communicate. It's hard to, explore yourself. It's kind of about being in a space to be receptive to those things, or feeling confident enough to move forward in exploring those things. And keeping pleasure in mind, it's about, my whole thing is reintroducing yourself to pleasure when you know what you know. So when you get that new information, when you come across that new experience, pleasure might be different to you. You might, when you get that confidence, you might communicate differently. Your relationships might change. So that's my focus right now. And I think I will go ahead and pass it on to Kelsey.
Thank you. Wow. Well, I've already cried once, so we're on.
Oh, I'm trying to hold the tears.
When Sam said her thing, I was like, no, it's happening. Yeah. So I guess before I go into my thing, I also want to say that our group, when we fell in love with each other as a supervision group and decided to keep meeting once a week, it really was such a highlight of my week, because this program that we are all in, for me, a lot of it was the education that I never got. And I've heard that from others as well. But just speaking for myself, having grown up in Texas, where I went to a public middle school and was given an abstinence card for part of my sex education, like a lot of this was just unraveling and unlearning and then relearning. And so to be able to come here to this space with all of you once a week, it felt like I could drop into the safety of asking questions, discussing, so much of what we were learning, and nothing being off the table to ask and discuss. And I'm just so grateful for all of you. So in terms of what I am really interested in, I specialize right now in working with teens, specifically teens in female bodies. I have a group called The Hive, and this is a group that I meet with once a week. And we talk about everything from body image to how social media skews our perceptions of our own bodies, to menstruation and the female hormonal cycle, and how we just don't give enough honoring to what that actually looks like, the phases within the cycle, embodiment, and how to really get in touch with your own intuition, and really just teaching and empowering teens and female bodies to trust and know the magnificence of their own bodies. That is what I'm currently really passionate about and working with. So thank you all for listening. Those of you who are tuning in, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening or both, we really appreciate you being here. And I will just kind of give you the structure of how this podcast is going to go. So basically, each week, one of us is going to host based on a topic that we have chosen as individuals that we want to bring to the table, that we're interested in, that we want to discuss, that we have questions about. And then the rest of us are going to sort of just lean into that and have a discussion and make it sort of this really easy, open, sort of panel-like discussion space. And then at the end of our first season of recording, we want you, the listener, to be a part of the conversation. So we want to make it as open as possible for you all to send in your questions as well. So we're going to have a form that you can fill out through our Instagram page, through anywhere that you find us on our website. And you can always email us, and we want you to be able to reach out with your questions so we can explore those as well. So you are as much a part of this as we are. So thank you again for being here. And I'll go ahead and pass it over back to Dorothy.
I have a rogue question.
Yes, I want to hear it.
So in honor of popped
Is
up.
it a rogue question, or are you taking us on a detour?
The queen of pun. I am now passing my baton.
I feel like we need some sort of like gong or like ding whenever a road trip pun comes up, and we need to like keep track. I don't know. Like
We need the editor. We're gonna have to, maybe if I make beep beep signs, maybe the editor can put in the beep beep like when that happens. Like, come on.
It's too good to not have that. Yeah.
So yes, take us on a detour, Dorothy.
I would like to take us on a detour in honor of no stupid questions, in honor of always learning and not knowing everything. And really going off of what Michelle mentioned with like things change, right? Like 1 year it's this, and then a year later it's something completely different. So the rogue detour question is, what is a I used to say statement, or I used to say this when it comes to sex and relationships? And I'll go first if that's easier. I used to use yoni eggs, but like jade and rose quartz, until our supervision group, when people informed me those are porous, very challenging to clean. So probably shouldn't be putting that in your vaginal canal. So that's how I used to be like, oh, it's a great exercise, which it was fantastic, but probably not the safest when it comes to taking care of your body. So I used to say yoni eggs were, jade eggs were amazing.
I'm thinking. I know that's like such a great question.
Well,
like
I can go because this has been constantly coming up this week. So growing up in a purity culture in a town called Lynchburg, Virginia, which our viewers will get to hear more about me, but I literally live miles from Liberty University, which is kind of the hotbed of sexual oppression inside of evangelical Christianity. I grew up being indoctrinated that porn was literally the downfall of sexuality, that porn was the reason that all evil happened within sex. And so it took a long time for me to, and this is actually, that was one of our conversations, wasn't it? Katie, of course, is always giving us good, challenging questions. And, we had a long conversation once on what is ethical porn. And then Katie challenged what makes it ethical porn? What does ethical even mean? Who's writing the standard for ethical? Which is types of questions we plan to have on here. But I definitely have moved from porn is the downfall of all man to ethical porn done well, consensually, can be a beautiful, beautiful educational tool that is safe, that is not something where you're going to go and have a possible pregnancy, which we know that's a kind of crazy thing in the world right now. I mean, there are many benefits of porn. And talk about moving from one spectrum to the other. Yeah. And that's just come up a lot because I have a lot of Christian sex therapists in my town who feel that they are battling a porn war. And so, so that's just been something that I plan to be asking all of you about actually recently, because they're asking for some training. So anyway, that's a thing for me.
Yes, to everything that you just said, Lauren. I feel like I grew up with some really I think stigmatizing messages around pornography. And I mean, I think back to the original question, Dorothy, I can think of so many things that like I used to do, I used to say, I used to believe that like is no longer the fact now. So I also could have like an entire podcast episode dedicated to like Melanie unpacking her problems, which is not this podcast. But I will say that one thing I feel like this is one of like, I feel like I've outgrown and blossomed from this from the past couple of years, really, is like, as I really, I think, welcomed and embraced my queerness and like being a queer woman, I think for me, that was really about embracing and acknowledging the fluidity of my gender identity and my sexual orientation. I feel like I grew up with like a very static, like no both and, it's either or kind of messaging around like, okay, if you're straight forever, you know, like, or hey, you're gay, like you're gay forever. Like you can't change, you can't evolve, you can't blossom. And I think that certainly, I mean, labels, I think, are so wonderful and they can build community. And also, I think that they can be really limiting. And so that's also something that I've really grappled with, is how to hold a label and feel that community while also not limiting myself and my sexuality. And it's really just like, to me, I feel like my whole life and about like my own pleasure and identities and how I operate is just like coming from this source of fluidity and wanting to kind of go with the ebbs and flows and just be doing what like feels good and feels pleasurable or feels delightful, like you were saying, Dorothy. And I think that that really comes out for me in my sexual orientation and in my relationships with people.
Melanie, I think that's so interesting because that topic of fluidity, when it comes to sexuality, really, like, when you think about it, it's been so weaponized against the queer community, right? Which is why, like, that narrative of like, I was born this way it's not untrue, right? I think that one shouldn't have to be like have a biological component of their sexuality or their gender or whatever in order for it to be valid and respected and loved.
Yes.
And I think that's the push-pull of this, you know, my sexuality is fluid. And the way that can be weaponized, of course, right, is, well, if it's fluid, then you can change it. And it's like that, it doesn't mean that it can be changed necessarily. It means that it can evolve, but there's not like this element of I can enact my own will on my desires and my, you know, who I gravitate toward.
Right. And it's like this idea of like, because something evolves or if it changes or if it shifts, whatever word you want to use, like that inherently makes it less valid or less real. I think it's so incredibly, I think it's just like such like a major failure of like a way to look at humanity as a whole, because we're complex, we're messy, we're ever changing humans in so many different ways. And to say that like one identity or one label or however you use to define yourself has to be static and like has to remain the same, it blows my mind that like I really used to believe that when I was younger. And now that I feel like I have kind of opened up those doors and walked out of that cage, there's just like so much freedom that I feel that exudes from the inside out of me and like my body. And it is the most profound, powerful fucking thing.
Oh my God. Absolutely. I agree with everything you guys are saying, because when you said gay forever or something like I'm stuck somewhere, I remember when I was younger, we used to hide and we would go to my neighbors and then go watch porn because we were like, oh my God, naked people on TV. What are they doing? So, but then we would watch different things. So it could be maybe two girls or never two guys. I don't know why, but it was a girl and a boy or two girls doing things. And for me, I used to think it was hotter when it was two girls. right? But then I started thinking, oh, am I gay now? What is this? Why do I enjoy more this particular experience and not the other one so much? It's cool too, but this is better. It feels nicer. So I grew up thinking, oh, snap, I need to stop watching that because that would make me gay. And you know what they say about that. But then I grew up, and this is, I guess, answering Dorothy. I used to think that I was gay back then at the same time. But at the same time, I was like, I like men. I enjoy that. But it's okay for me to watch gay porn, I guess. You know what I mean? So it's cool to kind of accept yourself as you are and not have to listen to everything. I would say negative things that are kind of that put you in that box, which is a box that I never wanted to be in. So, and I used to think, oh, I had something else, but it's gone now.
I think that both what Melanie and Sam you're talking about really, it should be highlighted, right? That these experiences, whether you want to call them being sexually fluid or having that experience, like to me, one of those things that I grew up with believing, and I don't know if I necessarily like perpetuated it, but internally I certainly did, was that bisexuality means I'm attracted to female bodies, people like I'm attracted to two genders equally was the thing for me, right? And it was like, well, if I'm not attracted to both equally, then I'm not bisexual. And yeah, and that we know now that that's not the way a lot of people experience bisexuality, right? Or attraction or desire. Like it's not this 50-50 split.
Absolutely.
I can go next. So to go along with the theme of absolutes, I used to think that you have to have a mind-blowing, earth-shattering orgasm for sex to be good. And if you didn't, it was bad. And I think that a lot of that was the messaging that we got. So on TV, all the sex scenes are not like they are now, where they're a little more realistic, but it was, oh, they met, everybody's naked, oh, it's over. Everybody had a great time. That's it. So
and people orgasmed like at the same time too.
Yeah,
that was the huge thing. Yes.
So it's like even in magazines on Cosmo, 5 things to do or 5 positions to have.
Oh, his mind.
Yeah. So I think that was one of the most detrimental messages that we got, because even partners, they will see that. And oh, did you come? Did you enjoy yourself? And then there's that pressure. And then it's, oh, well, you weren't very expressive. Can you be more expressive? And yeah. So it's kind of like, for me, I'm not very performative. Like I can't be. I don't know if you've noticed. I really can't. So that I've learned that is not true.
I will piggyback off of that, Michelle, because that's something that I think about when I teach teens, is like what they're seeing in media. And I think about what I grew up seeing. You know, we grew up in like 90s chick flick rom-coms where like, you know, all of a sudden there's like this telepathic consent happening, quote unquote, of like, of course she wants to be slammed against the wall and then made out with, and then everything just like, and then they have penetrative sex and it all just works out. No one's talking about a condom or protection. And I always was the one who was like, when are they going to talk? Like I would think about after, like, do you think they used a condom? Or like, do you think they asked each other about STIs? So now I talk with my teens about topic of consent, which will be, I think, what I'm going to bring in later in another episode, because I really believe that consent is not, and I think we all believe this, is not a one-time ask, and it is an ever-present dialogue that is a part of the whole experience, even before you start being physically intimate with a partner. And I think that my whole idea of consent and stating boundaries early on has just shifted dramatically, where I used to think that there was almost something wrong with me for like having strong boundaries and for wanting to bring these things up early. But it's like, that is so empowering and important. And also when we do that, it empowers the other person to also state their boundaries. And then the whole thing can be this consensual experience. So my thinking around consent and boundaries has just expanded dramatically. So that's, I think, one thing that's definitely shifted in such a good way.
Amazing.
Love it.
I love that.
So impressed by all of you. Jeez. My goodness.
I'm like, I liked this detour. Is it more like of a road stop? Do we like get out and have
Yeah,
snacks?
Detour,
And you-
Dorothy.
I like
The
it,
scenic
Dorothy.
route.
Well, I think I have another pung. Pung.
Fun.
Yes.
Pung? Wait, what are you saying? Pung?
How do you say it?
A
Fun.
pun?
Pung.
A pun with an N? Like, are you?
Fun.
Do you have something funny to share? Are you
I
going to be
don't
funny?
know, but it's for off of Kelsey's. If you want to do consent, giving the right of way.
Oh,
There's the gong.
that's it.
He's back. over. You are like the empress of puns. You are just promoting yourself and promoting yourself.
That's it. You get your crown back. I'm handing it back. That's so much better.
I love it.
Now, Kelsey, I hope you wrote that down. I'll also write it down because that would be such a great episode title.
I'm on it.
Oh, that was such a good pun. That was really
Pun.
fun.
Pun. Okay.
P-U-N.
Fun.
Pun.
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 Were you trying to
should
say
we-
tongue?
Pun.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm taking us down this rabbit hole. I am
Yep.
just so okay. Yes.
Should
it was
we
a
hand it over to
So why the name Sex Drive? We've had so many wonderful conversations and we're so excited to share them with you. When trying to think of a name, we ended up on a tangent about vulva owners. And I have to enunciate this, vulva owners, because it often is heard as vulvo, right? So the whole tangent just went to sex drive and how much fun we can have with that, with some of the names of the episodes, and really how there is this beautiful part when it comes to relationships and sex and how that is, right? There's this phrase of sex drive. We realized that our weekly conversations were beneficial, not only for us, but also we thought they would be beneficial for other people. So we wanted to have fun with this and also be in that realm of educators as well as forever learners. And so as sex educators, we're very aware that there's some questions about sex drive even being a thing. So we wanted to talk a little bit about this because there are some people who say sex drive is not a thing and some people who want to hold on to that or have a different viewpoint. I can share my quick viewpoint. I find for myself as an educator, I want to meet my students where they're at. So, and sometimes that means using phrases that maybe doesn't quite work, like the phrase sex drive or the phrase vagina, right? When talking about the vulva, not everyone knows the name vulva, right? Like not everyone's there. So wanting to meet students where they're at as much as possible. When it comes to sex drive, how I explain to my students is that dual control. So I am of the dual control. I like that. I like how there is the freedom and it makes people at ease that, oh, maybe I'm not necessarily going to be my libido isn't always like ready to rev up and go right off the bat. Maybe I need a bit more time. And I do come from the space of, I think we've lived in a world of the masculine sexual energy and sexual experiences, where it's all about the end goal of orgasm, all about get it done as soon as you can, where the feminine sexual experience, and I don't mean necessarily men have sex this way, women have sex this way. I mean it on that feminine energy and how that is really about taking time and being receptive and enjoying oneself. I compare it to if you're eating a meal, the masculine side is like a snack. you're like, oh, that was a delicious treat, right? It's like quick, fast, like, all right, I can enjoy that. Whereas the feminine side is that 5-course meal where you're taking your time, enjoying yourself, and you're even enjoying the palate cleansers. So anyone else have any thoughts?
I just got this picture in my mind of the masculine form of sexuality being like a road trip snack, and a female form of sexuality is like you're pulling off the road to like you've like gone on Yelp and you're like, where's there a fun space to stop in this town in the middle of nowhere? That's just what I got in my head. Like my partner, male partner, eats those peanut bags, those little peanut bags, and he like spills the whole thing into his mouth and he's just done and he loves it. That's all I had in my mind.
Right? It's like a picnic. You're stopping. You're like, you know what? Let's go get this beautiful view I've heard about. We're going to pick up all these different treats along the way, and we're going to have this beautiful picnic. And I want to stop at, get takeout from this place and over here. We're just going to make a beautiful spread. And then you fall asleep and you have a beautiful nap and you wake up and then you're like, I'm still hungry. I would like to enjoy some other.
Can I also add, when you were talking about the name Sex Drive and where it all started, did we mention, Katie, wasn't it you who came in one day and you were like, listen, I can't say vulva owner without thinking about Volvos. And that's where it all started, because then the car puns just ensued and we were on a roll. And
yeah.
On a roll.
Yeah.
Rolling.
Yeah, we were rolling. And I just had to give Katie credit, because I think that we were just on the floor when she came in and was like, I can't talk about vulva owners without thinking of Volvos.
Well,
so that's where it all began.
Can we come up with a better name to signify that not all people with vulvas are women, right? And so we use the term vulva owner, but I don't know, it's like just people with vulvas sounds it just sounds like we're not so car, like I don't think of like I own my vulva. I don't know, whatever. Going down the car again, but yes, that's how it came out.
Mm-hmm.
And also like, so Sex Drive, yeah, it was just like this punny thing based on the Volvo car, but I know one of the things that we wanted to mention was that the idea that sex, or rather like the desire or the need for sex, is not an actual need as it's been previously communicated. Like sex is a need, like food and water and shelter are needs. And I think we even have some different opinions in this group about that, but to just highlight that, that it's not necessarily a need or a drive or this like imperative, like we're all in need of pursuing sexual gratification.
No, and I think the reason that that's important to me, and I know we do have somebody in here who disagrees, so I want you to step forward. I don't remember who it is, but the amount of clients I literally got out of a session before this, and the reason the client is with me is that they feel they do not have, like, that their sex drive is gone. Like those are the terminology. And so to Dorothy's point, sometimes it's useful to use the term, but then it is also incredibly validating and normalizing sometimes to tell individuals, oh, guess what? You're totally fine. That's one of those media messages that Kelsey was talking about that's just been thrown in our face. Like your partner of 20 years is going to come home and you're just going to want to throw them up against the wall and have non-consensual interactions with them. No, you're not. There's nothing wrong with you because someone somewhere told you that you need to have a certain kind of sex drive. And so, yeah, I think it's very ironic that we have a podcast called Sex Drive when we spend time telling people they don't actually need to have a certain kind of sex drive. But
yeah, does anybody want to talk more about what the dual control model is that Dorothy brought up, and like how that the different types of desire that can be experienced? I think that would be really helpful.
Can I start?
Yeah.
I think one of the things I hope that we really do successfully is let people know that it is normal and to, while we explain responsive desire and spontaneous desire as those things come up, that we are empowering people and making it apparent that there are things that they can do to be more aware of what's going on in their life or change things that are going on in their life. So when it comes to responsive desire, or we'll say, isn't it, most people, or a lot of people respond to responsive desire. So that's like in the moment, the candles are lit, the music is on, the mood is there, and maybe it might even take touch to start, to become aroused. So in that moment, you might be, ready for any kind of sexual activity, whatever that is to you. And spontaneous desire is exactly what it is. So you might randomly have an urge, or you might randomly want sex. So you could be in the store, in the grocery store. You could be, in the gym. You could be going for a walk and think, like that, I could go for that right now. So for a lot of people, that spontaneous desire isn't as common.
Yeah. Y'all, I came prepared with Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. It's basically like, I wish I could carry this around everywhere. Maybe I should just start doing it. I don't know why I'm not doing it, but
it's your Bible. It's like, have you heard of our good Lord and Savior?
Emily Nagoski. Oh my gosh, yes. I just completely reaffirm, Michelle, what you're saying, and to just quote Emily Nagoski, I'm thinking I could read out how it's defined in the book.
Sure, yeah.
In like the dual control model, yeah, just to kind of give us and the listeners some grounding, at least for me, when this is where I first heard about the dual control model. So it really is kind of my go-to reference. And so Emily Nagoski, which again, people, Come As You Are, if you haven't read this book, read it. There's also a workbook, which I also love, because anytime I get to like fill out a sheet and think deeply about my own life, I feel really productive. Okay. According to the dual control model, the sexual response mechanism in our brains consists of a pair of universal components, a sexual accelerator and sexual brakes. And those components respond to broad categories of sexual stimuli, including genital sensations, visual stimulation, and emotional context. And the sensitivity of each component varies from person to person. And so that's like a that's like right at the beginning of the book, very big, broad definition of the dual control model. And definitely starting to think about like responsive desire, absolutely. And the importance of context in desire, I think super fundamental to the book, but I also think it's really one of definitely my biggest takeaway, but like something that I really value in terms of like when talking around about desire or like sex drive, is that context matters. I see that in my own life when I am wanting to masturbate and I'm like, I'm not really feeling it right now. Why am I not feeling it? Am I stressed? Like maybe I need to set myself the mood. Let me light a candle. Let me take a bath. Like, let me listen to some music. I really kind of see that show up in my life in a lot of big ways. And I also feel like I don't want to like bring us down a huge tangent, because I do kind of want to come back to what I just said and what Michelle was saying. I do feel like kind of the common understanding in a lot of the mainstream language and how we think about sex drive, I think can also be really exclusive to asexual people, right? Like, I think that is also something that sometimes with the word and like how people talk about sex drive, of the like, it's something that everyone has, it's like innate. I think that sometimes that language can be really stigmatizing to people who are like, oh my God, wait, I don't feel that kind of desire or attraction to someone right away. I don't feel it at all, or it takes me a while to get there. Like, I feel like how we talk about it, and I'm saying like big we as like a society talk about it, I feel like sometimes it can make people feel like broken if they're not like feeling this like innate drive that every human being has. And I think that that's something that I have definitely become more aware of and definitely more tentative of when talking about desire and using like sex drive terminology?
For me, I think sex drive seems a bit cold or a bit savage, a little bit. So I do believe that sex and sexuality is very complex. Like you all are saying, it is about our bodies, our hormones, our feelings, relationships, about touching or being touched, or do we even like being touched? It's all of those things together. So I kind of grew up in that sex drive focused type of mentality, which I now believe can be a bit impersonal and robotic. So yeah, that's what I think about sex drive, right? A little bit. Are we at the almost at the end of this road trip, or somebody? I did that.
Perfect timing. Yeah, no, I think that's great. You can go ahead, Sam, if you want to continue.
Somebody wants to add something about the sex drive. I think Kelsey, did you say something?
Did I?
I think
I
you should,
want-
Kelsey. I'm anxious for your thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts on the sex drive terminology and how you feel about it personally, and then how you're presenting it possibly to teens as well. I would just love to hear a snippet of your thoughts. Yeah.
I think I was so in the listening mode, I wasn't preparing what I was going to say, honestly. So I don't think I'm going to share anything right now. I feel like what everyone else said was perfect. So I'd love to pass on this one.
Sorry. I was going to say, I think I have a last thought about sex drive, because one of the common things that we hear is, oh, our sex drives don't match up, or, and it becomes an issue. While that's can be a legitimate thing, I want to highlight the idea of the things that get you going, or the exciters, or the things that like hold you back, the inhibitors. Like if you are not sleeping well and work sucks and your family is on 10, if your partner is not picking up the clothes like you asked them to, if there are dishes in the sink, if you feel like you're on your own, why would you want to have sex? Like that's it might not be something that you would want to do. So and I think that is okay. It's normal.
It's totally okay. Michelle,
Absolutely.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that is one of the things that Emily talks about in the book, right? Is how important, how critical context is to desire, right? Mm-hmm. And I think she uses the example of being tickled, where, sometimes it's the same physical stimulus, and sometimes it can be like playful and fun, and then sometimes it can be like, get the bleep off me. Right? And it's all about the context that you're in. And like one of the things, I think that it's really like this conversation about sex drive and desire really highlights how important it is to talk about it, like the emotional turmoil that so many people are in, myself included, my former self of not being in sex ed included, not having this information about how desire works. And I think there's so much internal struggle and turmoil that people go through when they feel so much shame around not experiencing the kind of desire that we see on TV. Right? That we see mirrored back at us. And there's such that disconnect of like, my experience does not look like that and doesn't feel like that. So there's something wrong with me or my relationship, when really, like being a human in this world right now is enough of a context for a lot of people's quote unquote drive to take a nosedive. And like the population I primarily work with, people going through infertility, I say to those folks all the time, it's like, think about that context though, right? You're having sex for this like that can be like very mechanical, very timed, very like disappointment and stress like imbued. You're probably not going to have a lot of that desire for it. And that doesn't mean it doesn't have to mean anything, right? It doesn't have to mean that there's something wrong with our body or our partner's body or our relationship. But that's, I think, where so much of the distress can come in, and rightfully so.
Right.
I was thinking too, and this is kind of a full circle moment back to some of like the original things Sam was saying about changing over time. And Melanie was saying as well, that I just had a student tell me that throughout the span of us working together, they've ended up doing the SIS and SES quiz out of the Nagoski book 3 times now because of various different things. They were in like a group class. They did it there. They did it then. They did it then. And it has changed every single time. Right? Which speaks so much to the fact that context matters, right? Now they're trying to have a child, Katie, to speak to your point, right? And so there's all of those stressors to remember that, yeah, taking these quizzes can feel really like we're opening up a thing of Cosmo, but it's like, that doesn't define us forever. Right then and there, right? Like, yeah, you might rank this on your SES and there on your SIS, and you might be like, oh my gosh, like I am so affected by inhibitors. But that might be the context that you're in right then. And give yourself this option to be fluid, like welcome it, embrace the journey. That's all.
Yeah.
Dude, beep, beep.
Okay, wait, I do have something to share.
Yes.
Thank you for being so excited about that. Yeah,
I mean, love you all.
I was thinking about so much of, I think every single person has mentioned the importance of being in our bodies and learning about our bodies. Like, how are we expected to have a quote unquote sex drive if we first and foremost don't know our own bodies? We don't know what feels good, what we want, what desire, like allowing ourselves to experience desire, or, you know, in the context of what we were talking about with Emily Nagoski, like these breaks that can happen, also putting language to that and knowing that there is nothing wrong with you or broken in you if in a moment your breaks are going. And in a partnership of any kind, in any kind of relationship, it's so important to be able to express when those come up, and in physical intimacy as well, of like, if your break is coming up, like it's so important to say it. And one of my mentors, who's a sex therapist, she says we teach people how to treat us, and we have to teach people how to date us. We teach people how to touch us. Like, we can empower ourselves and others when we speak out loud, like, oh man, I actually need a moment. Like, I'm noticing that I'm feeling out of my body right now. Can we stop? You know, like these are things that are so vital to be able to say. And I think is all part of this bigger conversation about just sexuality being about being in our bodies. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say about it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's beautiful. Something I've noticed from something Michelle said and Kelsey.
No, I was just checking in. But go ahead, Melanie.
Just really quickly. Oh my gosh, I know that we've been spending so many glorious minutes here. Just like as we close out this conversation, I just want to like amplify what I really heard and felt from you, Katie, and you, Michelle, of like, it's okay to like not want to have sex. I feel like we don't hear that enough. We don't see that enough. Like, it's okay if you're not feeling that desire at any point in your life, whether it's in the moment, whether it's long-term, over a period of time. Like, I feel like that's something that I still kind of feel like I sometimes battle within myself of like, oh my gosh, like, I don't really want to have sex. Is there something wrong with me? And even in like conversations with like even my friends, like, it's always like this idea that, yeah, if you don't want to have sex at all times, basically, like there's something really wrong with you, or like something's not right. And so like, I just, for me, like for my inner self and for so many folks, like I always just want to reiterate and uplift what you were saying right there, Katie and Michelle, of just like, it's okay to not want to have sex or to not feel that desire at any point in your life. So yeah, thank you for saying it.
And it will come and go. It's our relationships with sexuality is going to ebb and flow, as you're saying, throughout our entire lives. Like as you age, when you're grieving, like everything affects it. So knowing that. So thanks for bringing that up, Melanie. That was super important.
So we're officially at the end of this road trip. Are we excited about the first episode?
Yay!
So excited. Oh my
Yay!
God. The
So-
first leg of the road trip is complete.
Yeah. So I want to remind our listeners or whoever is watching us that they can follow us. You can follow us on social media. And I'm going to spell this one because it's kind of fun. So it's Sex Drive Pod, but it's S3X DR1 VEPOD. So Sex Drive Pod. Do you have a question or a topic you want to hear us discuss? Fill out the form in the episode description or email us at sexdrivepodcast. Let me repeat that. sexdrivepodcast@gmail.com. And in closing, we want to remind everyone that the opinions expressed in this podcast belong to the educators themselves. We love research and invite you to do your own. Sexuality is not a one-size-fits-all subject. We encourage you to use your own personal wisdom before engaging in any new activities or behaviors. That's it.
Woohoo!
Woo! Oh my God. Yes. Mwah.